Hey friends, if after listening you find you want a little coven lovin' in your life, check out our sponsor, Foxglove Farm. Use offer code Missing Witches to get some of that handmade, ethical, awesome witchy goodness in your life. We always love hearing from you, so send us your reviews on whatever podcast service you use. And if you want to read the book, gosh, we'd love to send it to you. So find it, tell us what you think, and share your thoughts on Amazon or Goodreads. And yeah, see you out there. We love you. Be safe. Blessed if I can be.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Did you ever fall in love with the beat poets? Maybe it was just like a short but fiery love affair like mine, reading on the road in high school, and then even more when I slipped into Howl and it felt like the world got bigger suddenly, cracking open and people were slipping through cracks in the walls, scooting out from under white fences, leaving dry lawns, the prison of tightly constrained identities behind, finding the strange, the road, alleys and bars and bad hotels, your first vision of the thrum of something alive beyond the robot death grip and literal anti-communist, anti-gay, anti-art, anti-woman witch hunts of the day. But the love affair didn't last long, for me at least. Maybe because most of us weren't actually invited. We didn't see ourselves there. When we were taught the beats, even by our most scandalous teacher with the long scarves, there were no women poets in the pantheon. We were never taught that Ginsberg was gay, and we were taught no black voices, no Indian or indigenous people strumming was acknowledged in the beats we were taught. There was just a lack, and so I took my heart back. Kept some lessons, but kept moving down the road, listening to something beyond, walking with this feeling unnameable for years that something was missing. To be clear, they were there, those voices, those writers, those witches. They were there in this and most every creative movement that's mattered. And they were fundamental to the magic of the scene and its knowledge and spirit and voice. We usually don't go missing by our own volition. Anyway, I wasn't taught Diane di Prima, and I didn't find her for a long time because that's the way the world goes round, as my daughter says. Big John Prine fan over here. But I found di Prima now, and my love is lit, and I'm never letting go. Di Prima wrote, "There is no way out of the spiritual battle. The war is the war against the imagination. You can't sign up as a conscientious objector. The war of the worlds hangs here, right now, in the balance. It is a war for this world, to keep it a veil of soul-making. The taste in all our mouths is the taste of power, and it is bitter as death. Bring yourself home to yourself. Enter the garden. The guy at the gate with the flaming sword is yourself. The war is the war for the human imagination." With Amiri Baraka, crucial black poet of the Beats generation, father to one of di Prima's 5 children, LA radio host Dominique di Prima, Diane di Prima co-edited the literary magazine The Floating Bear. Diane and Amiri ran it together, and then Diane kept it all afloat herself from 1961 to 1971, sending out electrifying new writing directly to a community of writers every couple of weeks. They paid out of pocket or with small donations to publish beat writers, poets of the New York School, Black Mountain, and other revolutionary writers of the time. Di Prima also co-founded the Poets Press and the New York Poets Theater, and founded Eidolon Editions and the Poets Institute. She co-founded the San Francisco Institute of Magical and Healing Arts. In 2009, she was named the Poet Laureate of San Francisco. After her mother passed, Dominique di Prima said, "The war is the war of the imagination, right? When you talk about the protests and everything here and around the world, that's what we were raised to do as children of di Primas, as children of Barakas, to be part of that change. And it is about reimagining. I mean, if you listen to Black Lives Matter, and if you listen to poets, it's about reimagining what we think we live like, what we think people interact like. and what we think policing is going to be. The war is the war against the imagination. There is no way out of a spiritual battle. There is no way you can avoid taking sides. There is no way you cannot have a poetics, no matter what you do, plumber, baker, teacher. You do it in the consciousness of making or not making your world. This poem rant became a rallying cry, along with di Prima's revolutionary letters. And Dominique describes young punks and trans people and old hippies all showing up at her mother's house for her 80th birthday. She describes a brave and profoundly inclusive person. As Amber Tamlin wrote for their beautiful and emotional obituary in The New Yorker, di Prima fought for queer rights, trans rights, and women's rights long before clothing lines and hashtags began to flood political movements. For 6 decades, her writing confronted the traditional stereotypes of the female body, how it should look, weigh, and be desired. She saw herself as a weapon to be deployed, no, detonated against her oppressors. She wrote about the equality of the sexes. She wrote about women as wolves, women as predators, as hunters, as villains. She wrote about fat women, queer women, androgynous women, disobedient women, women as gods, as birds, as the wind. Without knowing it, I was missing this word witch, historian witch, publisher witch, teacher witch, bisexual single mother witch who writes about the ways of light. And there is a radiant flux, full electromagnetic spectrum of power and light lit in me now from her that I'm trying to shine out here for you, in case you were missing her too. Most especially, if you are Italian American, if you were abused, if you are a mother, if you are queer, if you have been a seeker for the hidden religions and the parts of history that don't make it into the canon, if you are a word witch or a wolf witch, or one with their ear to the wind, with a sense that something's been missing, then my friend, I believe this witch left her work in the world for you. And in this circle which sound makes between our ears, Coven, I invite her in. I want to tell a story in her honor and trace a sketch of her thought, a mask we might wear for a while to give ourselves a new light to our vision and a taste of her power. Together we will put on the armor of her ideas and shriek and whisper and sing in her words. We have the right to make the universe we dream. Witches, we're back to talk about Foxglove Farm. We love these subscription boxes, and how full of magic they are.
Yeah, recently you spoke once or twice or a million times about us being so lucky, having found like soulmate collaborators in each other, soulmate editors, and I think I would like to add Foxglove Farm to that list of soulmates, a soulmate sponsor who really is just like, it's hard to be anti-capitalist and still like eat food, as we all know.
Yeah.
So it was really important for us to find a sponsor that was like ethically sound, or at least like in line with our values. And Sammy is like that and beyond.
Yeah, plus the boxes are so cute and they support so many witches and so many artists. It's just like a wonderful little bit of self-care that is community care that you can do to go get yourself one of these subscription boxes, and you're sponsoring and supporting Missing Witches when you do it. So get yourself in on it.
Yeah, get yourself a monthly present, and don't forget to use that offer code Missing Witches when you shop at foxglovefarm.com.
I was never introduced to Diane di Prima. 4 years of honors undergraduate English literature, a master's degree, she just slipped by me until the day she died. And I saw her lovingly mourned and lionized by witches I adore, and I went digging, and it truly was like falling in love. And also falling into a world, a wisdom, a library, this whole other canon. Reading her biography, I wrote down literally dozens of names for future Missing Witches episodes. And her syllabus for a class she created called Hidden Religions is so profoundly good if your interest is in the shape of how we think and dream and the way ideas get buried and deleted. And I think you are interested in those things, aren't you, listener? coven mate, distant friend. This is what brings us here, I think. Diane writes, if I am interested in anything with regard to that legacy, it is with overturning its controlling lineages and traditions. The need to be positioned within a canon which was never mine, either in my formation as a writer or in my presentation of myself. Listener, let this sink into you. You are of a piece with powerful poets, overturning the very need, the inherited and enculturated need to be in a canon that was never ours. She's flipping the tables in the fucking temple with her work and her words and her presentation of self, and it gives me such electric joy to see her out ahead of us like this, like a cleansing fire clearing a path. Di Prima grew up in an Italian family in New York. Her grandfather introduced her to poetry, opera, and to Italian philosophers on the margins, writing about light as a unifying principle. Trigger warning here, sexual abuse. Her father abused her sexually, some of which she remembered very clearly up until that very bad year that she didn't remember at all. He introduced her to Machiavelli and a sense of nothingness and the true smell and feeling of fascism. She got away. She went away to school, and miracle and wonder, she found a coven. Just an incredibly powerful gang of teenage girls, including, and you're not going to believe this, but it's true, Audre Lorde. And they called themselves the Branded. A group of 8 women who met to practice telepathy, trance, and communications with the dead, especially Keats and Shelley. Di Prima later published Lorde's work in her Poets Press. She was determined to listen, in trance, or by publishing them herself, to the voices she was longing to hear. Her monumental life work of creation and collaboration comes directly from that listening. She wrote, "There is some infallible mechanism in us, something like a dowsing rod of the heart, and it moves in us sometimes, moves seldom, but with total authority." That dowsing rod of the heart moved in her, and she knew she needed to craft poetry, because poetry itself was crucial magic. She wrote, "Poetry is magic. In the last years of this century, it seems clear to me that there is nowhere left for art to go than magic. The suffusion of spirit, drawing down of God forms, or drawing down of particular energies or powers with the will to make change. This is what magic, this is what art is for. There's nowhere left for art to go than the drawing down of powers with the will to make change. That is what it's for." Diane chooses to be a single mom and to make family in this evolving, kaleidoscopic variety of beautiful shapes that are also for her about crafting a new shape of what's possible for women and for the world, dissolving illusory boundaries to make more space, more love, more energy, more everything, dissolving the fear of that everything with her fierce love of life itself. In an interview with Jacket magazine, Di Prima said, "I wanted everything. Very earnestly and totally, I wanted to have every experience I could have. I wanted everything that was possible to a person in a female body, and that meant that I wanted to be a mother. So my feeling was, well, as I had many times had the feeling, well, nobody's done it quite this way before, but fuck it. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to risk it." So she crafts a beautiful new family while publishing books and gathering artists and following the dowsing rod of her heart to a poetic voice unlike any other, maybe because she was able to see and cherish love and family shapes unlike others. I love and offer these 3 glimpses into their life. This first one from Di Prima. In the early 1960s, after Ginsberg had returned from India wearing a new beard and many tales of his encounters with gurus, I was then presiding over a domain that included a husband and 3 children, a theater, and innumerable writing projects. Alan was frequently in and out of my house in those days, asking forthright questions as I chased a baby down the hall. How was my sex life? Or settling in for the evening to lead us all in a satsang. It was a time when we, all of us, cared about mantras. And second, this one from Robert Wilson, bookshop owner in Greenwich Village, where Diane di Prima would gather with writer friends and where the first issues of Floating Bear were printed on a mimeograph machine. He wrote, she was living at that time with her third husband, Alan Marlowe, in a condemned building, quite illegally of course, in what is now called the East Village. Actually, it was on Cooper Union Square, just a few houses south of the Cooper Union building. Diane was there not only with her husband, but her 3 children from prior attachments, as well as an enormous number of hangers-on, musicians, poets, various ex-lovers of her bisexual husband, and all too often simply spongers. Virtually none of them had jobs or could in any way contribute money to the communal establishment, but somehow Diane always managed to supply food and shelter for anyone who came knocking at her door. Writer Ariel Gore in Bluebird, Women and the New Psychology of Happiness, goes diving into di Prima's biography, Recollections of My Life as a Woman, to share this story of a night at Allen Ginsberg's in New York with Jack Kerouac, Philip Whalen, who were in town for one of those nights with lots of important, intense talk about writing you don't remember later. Gore quotes di Prima and tells the story this way. Well, Diane had promised her babysitter she'd be back at 11:30 that night, and 11:30 starts rolling around, so Diane bids her farewells. Whereupon Kerouac raised himself up on one elbow on the linoleum and announced in a stentorian voice, "Di Prima, unless you forget about your babysitter, you're never going to be a writer." I considered this carefully, then and later, di Prima writes, allowed that at least part of me thought he was right, but nevertheless I got up and went home. I'd given my word to my friend, she explains, and I would keep it. Maybe I was never going to be a writer, but I had to risk it. That was the risk that was hidden, like a Chinese puzzle, inside the other risk of, can I be a single mom and be a poet? Gore continues, a serious question, that one. Serious not only for moms, but for all of us. Can we be present in our relationships and still do the work we feel called to do? It's like my friend Lynn says, a woman has to make a real effort not to dissolve into everything that needs her. Looking back, di Prima recognizes what is true. Had she opted to stay that night, there would be no poems. That is, the person who would have left a friend hanging, who had done her a favor, also wouldn't have stuck through thick and thin to the business of making poems. It is the same discipline throughout. Gore writes, we don't need children to be happy, but motherhood has taught me this. To experience joy, we have to be able to honestly experience darkness too. In responsibility to relationship, we build bodies of memory and life experience that we can be proud of. Motherhood has taught me that the opposite of happiness isn't struggle. It isn't even depression. The opposite of happiness is fear and obedience. In Revolutionary Letters, di Prima writes, be strong. We have the right to make the universe we dream. No need to fear science, groveling apology for things as they are. All power to joy, which will remake the world. I feel so emotional reading that. I didn't expect it. All power to joy. Di Prima's writing and life shows the lie to the selfish, solitary myth of individualism. We were missing the context, skipping not just the women and the kids and the queer family and the swords and the chores and the woods, but also skipping huge sections of work and the lives of major thinkers who have been accepted and upheld in these formal canons and pantheons with kind of dusty sheets in the corners thrown over the magical and uncomfortable pieces of their praxis. Di Prima writes, we're in the position that we've always been in with great minds, of wanting to take part of the package and leave the rest. Like, let's take Newton's law of mechanics and forget his alchemy. Let's decide that poor John Dee was a great mathematician, but he must have gone crazy when he started conjuring. And to just bring them into the light of day, because I feel that we can't afford to go on ignoring that part of people's lives and work. I think we're at the point where this magic or the spiritual or whatever you want to call it, the part of ourselves that we have been keeping out of the spotlight because of being caught in a few hundred years of rationalism civilization, has got to come back into the work. David Stephen Calonne, author of Diane di Prima, Visionary Poetics and the Hidden Religions, where a lot of these amazing di Prima quotes were pulled from, writes that di Prima also conceived of this secret history of intellectual and spiritual evolution as essentially aimed at human liberation, and believed anarchism, gender equality, communal property, and sexual freedom were interlinked conceptions. So hold up and let's unpack this, because this is right at the beating bloody heart of what interests me when I go looking for these ideas. It's the relationship between human liberation, gender equality and inclusion, the freedom to love and celebrate all consensual acts of joy and pleasure, and communal property from common land, public spaces, the land back movement, and indigenous stewardship, even to movements in different spheres like open source software and new regulatory ideas like housing first, or basic income, or guaranteed livable income. The equitable distribution of wealth based on the shared ownership and stewardship of resources, finally lifting the mind and body burden of this death cult of late-stage capitalism. I think these ideas are related to our project, witches. There is a connection here to our liberation and our power, and a relationship, too, to the history and heart of anarchy. In Occult Features of Anarchism, Erica Lagalisse traces so many moments where these revolutionary philosophies intertwine, and di Prima would have been deeply versed in these. Lagalisse writes, Chulkov, Berdiev, and Ivanov, contemporaries of both Fedorov and Tolstoy during the Russian occult revival, all posited a mystical anarchism that equated political revolution with realignment in the cosmic sphere. In England, union organizer and early feminist Annie Besant, who organized women matchmakers and fought to open the Masonic lodges to women, was convinced she was the reincarnation of Giordano Bruno. And it was theosophy that inspired her fight for home rule in India. It was also through theosophy that she met Jawaharlal Nehru, himself a member of the Theosophical Society. Just as socialists were attracted to the occult, spiritualists and mediums of all kind, who were disproportionately women, were led by their spiritual views to engage the social question. Not all forms of anarchy harmonize with my own evolving personal philosophy, but I do love this shared history, especially for women, of political and spiritual thought. And I love the idea, summarized in Stanford's Encyclopedia of Philosophy, that anarchists offer a positive theory of human flourishing, based upon an ideal of non-coercive consensus building. A communal flourishing, based on independent choices woven together through consensus building rather than coercion. An idea that is fundamentally, according to di Prima, interlinked with gender and sexual freedom, and the physical and existential need for communal property. Silvia Federici includes ritual under her beautiful tent of an idea of communal property. Some of our heritage, stories, and our magic, as well as our land, needs to be liberated from the violent borders imposed by the illusion of individual ownership for us to re-enchant and heal the world. All of these concepts are linked in di Prima's telling of a secret history, what we might think of as the spiritual and material philosophy of missing witchcraft. Diane thinks the work of nurturing and weaving those elusive seeds of ideas falls largely now to women, and I'd include all people of identities marginalized by that stifling web of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, for the same reason she outlines when she says, women are in the forefront of figuring out what it is to be human. Because I don't think the guys have got the slightest handle on it yet. I'm not mad at them for that. I just think they're kind of slow. They've been caught by these structures. They've been caught by the analytic way. They've been caught by all the things that make their male white supremacist world work on a temporary basis. They're in love with those things, so they're too slow to realize that there's endless potential to the imagination, to the human emotions. And art is only interesting when it's pushing at those boundaries. As Nancy M. Grace and Tony Trigilio argue, Loba compels a reader to consider the possibility that masculinist myths of culture, language, reason, and immortality, as well as aesthetics, are acts not of knowledge but of ignorance and ego, repeatedly performed on the back of female silence, subjugation, and invisibility. Di Prima seeks to find a path toward the mysteries of existence which cannot be approached only through the analytic way, but must be apprehended through the imagination, feeling, and intuition. That's also from Calonne's Di Prima's Visionary Poetics and Hidden Religions, and at another point in that vast love treatise to her thought and work and life, they write, her decades-long work on Loba should be understood as her effort to redress the balance, to place the female principle, the goddess, the witch, the magna mater, the great mother back in the primary role it enjoyed before being dethroned by the male patriarchal god with a large G. In prayer to the mothers, Di Prima invokes the mothers who still perhaps dwell in the depths of the earth or on some sacred mountain. She seeks their intercession in our troubled world and implores them to wake us like children from a nightmare, give the slip to the devourers whom I cannot name, the metal men who walk on all our substance, crushing flesh to swamp. Di Prima started writing Loba in 1971. She was in her late 30s and had already lived these different interwoven lifetimes, including running a theater and a press, publishing 7 books, raising 5 children, traveling and studying and teaching in the hidden histories and religions. And all of that craft and life gets baked into Loba, into this terse and somehow also vast multiverse of woman, goddess, wolf identities. Loba begins by calling out to us. O lost moon sisters, crescent in hair, sea underfoot do you wander. In blue veil, in green leaf, in tattered shawl do you wander. With gold leaf skin, with flaming hair do you wander. On Avenue A, on Bleecker Street do you wander. On Rampart Street, on Fillmore Street do you wander. With flower wreath, with jeweled breath do you wander. Footprints shining mother of pearl behind you. Moonstone eyes in which the crescent moon, with gloves, with hat, in rags, in fur, in beads. Under the waning moon, hair streaming in black rain, wailing with stray dogs, hissing in doorways, shadows that you are, that fall on crossroads, highways. Jaywalking do you wander, spitting do you wander, mumbling and crying do you wander, aged and talking to yourselves. With roving eyes do you wander, hot for quick love do you wander, weeping your dead. Naked you walk, swathed in long robes you walk, swaddled in death shroud you walk, backwards you walk, hungry, hungry, hungry. Here and everywhere I've looked so far, her work seems like the poet's act of memory. This witch was looking for us. And she was out there, leaning into the wind, running her fingers through the grass, diving with her ink and stones, casting for a liberatory truth. She wrote, remember that all you need to remember is what you love. Remember to marry the world. Calonne writes, she tells us that she conceptualized her spiritual quest as involving imminent supernatural forces dancing with light which shape human lives. The I Ching, the study of magic, the awesome mystery of the universe which cannot be controlled or rationally understood but only experienced, were defining aspects of her generation's conception of reality. There is a sense of surrender here, but not fatalism. What does that mean for you, listener? Surrender, but not fatalism. Dancing with the light. There's something in here about the ways we are able to use craft, I Ching, ritual, the physical making and question asking to see what's possible, which way the lines curve, and then choose our next step, casting us into new light and into the next lift of melody. There's something so Beat Generation, so smoky basement jazz improvisation about all this. But she makes it clear this potential isn't unique to her generation. In her 80s, she explained, when the time came for me, I went out on the streets and said what I had to say. Before that, we holed up and just talked about it among ourselves. Remember, in the late 50s, there were maybe hundreds of us that could network across the nation. That's all, hundreds. Yet we can make things happen and it changed the world. With the internet, with all the new technologies that younger people have at their disposal, the opportunities for networking and sharing information and ideas, there's so much more that can happen now. So we've got to be hopeful. I'm optimistic. In another poem of di Prima's dedicated to jazz pianist Thelonious Monk, she wrote, "The stars are a memory system, for through them we remember our origin. Our home is behind the sun, or a divine wind that fills us makes us think so. She is calling to the part of us that hums when the wind blows. And her poems are that too, catching what she heard on her travels, not in the world, but throughout mind and dimension. Towards the end of her life, she indicated that she'd been aware of a choice for the final years, either to go through all her belongings, books and notes, and find all the poems, to gather them up for the future, to do the editing and shaping, to help us make sense of all she'd seen, or to keep traveling and write it all down on whatever scrap was at hand. Both choices are generous in their own right, but she chose the traveler. So some of her work is still scrawled in the backs of books, waiting. Her immensely complex and well-read philosophy is encoded in many sites. It is a web all its own. It's in her course syllabus for hidden religions, in her semi-fictional autobiographies and semi-biographical novels and plays, and perhaps most directly in her poems, because for her, they were a site of pure magic, pulsing with light and seed and darkness and the bloody fangs of wolves, and our own pleasure and hope and a goddess riding the night, carving into the very edge of the stifling world. We have a right to make the universe we dream. We have a right to make the universe we dream. Say it again to yourself. Whisper and howl it into the night. We have a right to make the universe we dream. Coven, if you find you want more missing witches and this strange magic in your life, come grab a t-shirt at TeePublic or one of the sweet black hoodies that I wear all the time, or get our book. We poured our heart and brains and minds and all the magic we could find into it. We'd love to know what you think. We'd love to read your reviews on Amazon or Goodreads. And of course, the old rate, review, and subscribe means a lot. And support our sponsor at Foxglove Farm using offer code Missing Witches. Thanks. Love you. Bye.